Welcome to She Defined, the podcast for smart, savvy women who are in search of more. I'm your host, Sharon Green. Today I'm joined by Emma Lennon, She Define's feature writer and all-round lovely human. Welcome, Emma.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here chatting to you.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about a rather serious topic, but I think it's something that's not widely spoken about enough, and that's about being child-free by choice. We are both women who have actively made the choice to not have children. We haven't ended up here due to circumstance, like things that are beyond our control or due to infertility. We have both weighed up the pros and cons of having children and decided it's just not for us. And so we want to talk about that. So I want to kick off with some talking points around like that indecision and the process of making the choice to be child-free. Because I think for people like us who've actively made the choice, a lot of people may not realise we put a lot of thought into it and it is a decision we've made. And I remind myself of that all the time. It is a choice, just as much to decide not to have children as it is to have children. So personally, I went on quite a journey until I reached the point where I felt decided about not having kids. And for me, the path to getting to that decided point wasn't necessarily an easy one. But now that I'm on the other side of having made that choice, I thought it would be good to kind of share what that experience was like. And hopefully it might help some others who are navigating this choice as well, because it is a big one. And also, I just want to open up this subject so we can talk about it in a more open-minded way and with a little bit more compassion. So, Em, you've also made the choice to remain child-free. I actually don't know anything about how you went about making the decision, so maybe we'll kick off with you. Did you ever feel undecided, or were you always quite firm on your choice to not have children?
I think for me, there was always just this assumption that that was the natural progression of life. But if I'm really thinking about it, I never had this dream of having kids. I wasn't particularly even interested in playing with dolls. I preferred dinosaurs, if you were wondering. I never had this dream of becoming a mother, and I didn't think about it very much at first because everybody just kept assuring me that that's what would happen, and eventually you'd wake up with all these maternal instincts and you'd realize that that's what you wanted for your life. And I was so young that I just really didn't think about it. But then as I got older and older and more of my friends started talking about the future and what they wanted to name their kids and all the things they wanted to do as parents, I started to think, like, is there something wrong with me? Like, did they not install a chip or something in my programming? Like, why do I not care much for this? And I mean, I liked kids. I don't actively dislike them, but I would also notice that I would become very tired after spending a lot of time with kids. And I think that might have something to do with my just natural temperament and my nervous system. But I guess I didn't really think about it too deeply until I was kind of in my 20s, when people were starting to be like, well, you need to make these decisions, biological clock, etc. But for me, I didn't really ever feel undecided. If anything, all of the reasons that I didn't want to have children just kept accumulating. I think that I do tend to think about things very deeply, and I'm quite self-aware, like introspective person almost to a fault. I don't like to make decisions rashly. So I was never going to just go and have kids and then figure it out afterwards. I was always going to think about it very deeply. But I always felt pretty firmly on the camp of this is not for me, for so many reasons that I'm sure we'll unpack together. But it's just not, it was always pretty clear for me, honestly.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I came to it a little bit differently than that. I mean, retrospectively, when I look back, I think I was also kind of decided without knowing that I was. I never felt comfortable with the idea of having children. I felt way more comfortable with the idea of how my life was already looking without children in it. And I think ultimately that's kind of what made me go, oh, I shouldn't have them, amongst a host of other reasons. But I didn't really give it much thought in my 20s. I mean, I suppose not many women are, because we're preoccupied with things like going to university or getting skilled up or entering the workforce or just kind of enjoying life. And then for me, it really hit me sort of in my late 20s, I think probably when I was about 28, 29. And I think that's when, you have 30 looming and you're like, the biological clock's ticking and I need to make a choice either way. And I remember having a discussion with a close friend, and she said to me at the time, if I want to have kids, I really need to be thinking about that choice right now, around the age of 30, because she's like, if I want to have one, I need to be able to plan for that, and it may not happen straight away. If I want to have two or more, then I've got to allow the time to fit that in, because if I'm not having my first child by, say, 32, 33, the second one may not come along a few years after that. If you're delaying it any further, you're probably going to have kids into your late 30s, maybe early 40s, and it might not even be possible. And that really got me thinking about the forward planning that was required if you did want to go ahead and have children. And I kind of started feeling like quite panicked about it, because I was like, oh gosh, do I need to make a choice right now? And I felt this immense pressure, only at the age of like 28, 29, which seems ridiculous now, but I felt this immense pressure to make a decision either way, like to have or not to have kids. And that's when I think I was straddling that indecision, because I was weighing up all the reasons to have children, all the reasons not to have children. And I actually found that process extremely isolating, because I didn't know a single other person who was sitting in that place of indecision, like it could literally go either way. And it's very isolating when you feel like you're going through a thought process all on your own, because I did try and open the discussion with some friends, but most of them fell into two camps. It was, I'm having kids soon, or I'm already in the process of having kids. There was no, oh, I'm still thinking about it, or I'm still undecided, or maybe I won't have them. Like, I just didn't come across a single friend that was straddling this indecisive ground around making this huge decision, which is ultimately, I would say, the biggest decision you'll make for your life. I mean, we're talking about another human being here. I mean, did you have any friends that were undecided or opened the conversation sort of towards your late 20s?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that I was in a pretty similar situation where I can't recall, maybe I did, but I can't recall any friends who were really openly either undecided or were thinking about even the possibility of remaining child-free. I did feel quite alone, and I guess even more so than alone, I felt, like I mentioned before, that something was wrong with me. Like, I wasn't this naturally maternal, nurturing person, and it was quite difficult to come to terms with that and accept that, though I do think that I'm a kind and a caring person, I was really reflecting on why I didn't want to. And even aside from all of the practical reasons not to have children, of which I had many, I was like, I am just not someone with, I don't think I have the temperament for this job, which is arguably the only job in the world that you can't quit, you can't fully take time off from. And it's 24/7. It's relentless. And I have a lot of friends with children now, and I adore them and I adore their kids, and I know that this is what they wanted for their life. And it's still really, really freaking hard. Like, it is, the word many of them come back to me with is relentless. And the more experiences I heard of that, I was like, there is nothing in me that makes that suffering, because we all suffer for the things we love. There's nothing in me that wants that for myself. And so it was a little isolating, but when I was able to stop the self-judgment for that, all of the evidence was just like, no, kind of what you said, the idea of what my life will be without them, it feels right. It feels exciting. It feels like what I need.
Yeah. And you make a good point. It's the hardest job in the world, but it's also the job for which we receive no training. And yet we're expected to know exactly what to do, how to handle it. Like, if you think about any kind of professional job you've been into, you get some level of training or preparation, whether that's past experience you're bringing to a role or on-the-job training you get once you're in the position. I mean, unless you've had the opportunity to be around a lot of children in your life through babysitting or, I don't know, just being around them, you wouldn't really know what to expect. And even then, you're still quite far removed from the job of being a parent, that I don't think you fully understand what's involved. And that for me was always quite shocking, really. You know, everyone's doing this job out there, being parents, and we've not had any training for it, and yet we're expected to just do it and do it well. I don't know. I find that extremely overwhelming, that whole idea.
That is such a good point, because I'm just remembering that at one point I was like, well, maybe one day, but I don't think I want to give birth. So maybe one day I'll consider adoption. And I was looking into the process out of curiosity more than anything of foster care and adoption. And it is so intense. You have to jump through a million loopholes. You have to go through all of this testing, all of this training, all of this paperwork. It is so difficult. And yet, if you're able to biologically have a child, just
off you go. Yeah.
Have one, figure it out. The soft spot of their skull is here, and like there's some nappies over there. It just sounds so. It's very overwhelming. And my friend recently just had a baby. It's only 1 month old now. She's only 1 month old, and they're constantly like, oh, I didn't know about like feeding takes almost all of her time. Like there's just so many things that go into it. So I just think that the idea that you should just do it because that's what is done it's just never made sense to me.
Yeah, so tough. It's probably the biggest decision most people will make in their life, whether to have children or not. And I don't know, but for me, my perspective on my friends who have gone ahead and have had children, I feel like they've just made that decision so lightly. Maybe I'm incorrect in thinking this. Maybe they have discussed it to death and weighed up the pros and cons, but maybe it comes across to me as, oh, we just dived in and had kids because maybe they always knew that that was what they wanted, so they never really questioned it. But when I've had really deep discussions with a lot of my friends about all the things that I've weighed up, they've turned around and said to me, gosh, I never thought about it that much. I just knew I wanted kids and I had them. And that was actually so surprising to me, because I thought, I've sat here and questioned it and thought about it and analysed it far more than a lot of people I know that have gone ahead and made the decision to have kids. And I almost feel like they should be doing that just as much, because they went through with the decision, and there's a human being at the end of it, that they're responsible for and bringing into the world. And I don't know, I always found that like really, really shocking when I learned that, because for me, I always felt like if I did go down the path of choosing to have children, that would just feel like the hugest weight, the biggest responsibility. And it was just not something that I was prepared to take lightly. I mean, yeah, it's a human being at the end of the day that you're bringing into the world. Like, how could you make that decision lightly? I don't know what you think on that one, but
I have so many thoughts on that. And it's something that I often feel like, scared to say to my friends who either have kids or in the process of trying to have kids or know that they want to, because I don't want them to feel like I'm judging them for how they made that decision, which is ironic because people tend to feel very comfortable judging me and other child-free by choice women about, oh, like, why don't you want to have kids? It's like the ultimate form of love. It's the only fulfillment in life, whatever. But whenever I'm thinking about like, well, what about overpopulation? What about climate change? What about money? What about like the physical impacts on your body and your career and your relationships? I sometimes hold back on saying those things to my friends about their decision to have kids, even though I'm so curious, because I am worried that maybe they hadn't thought of that and I'm going to stress them out, or that they're going to think that I'm judging them or something like that. But yeah, it is interesting, and maybe it's just a reflection of like how different people's mindsets work in decision making in general. Like some people are very maybe gut and emotion directed. They go with their gut and they'll figure out the details later. Whereas I've always been someone, I need to sit with the details. I need to understand, what is this life going to entail before I can commit to it. And I guess it's just, different strokes for different folks. But I agree with you. It's always felt like, well, that's quite impulsive. Like, okay, good for you. I really hope it works for you. And I genuinely mean that. I really hope you're very happy with that decision. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I want to dive into some of the deciding factors that have shaped our decisions, I guess. You touched on a few just before, but let's kind of deep dive on them so that we can give our listeners some examples of the things that have influenced our decision to not have children. I'll kick off with a few to begin with. For me, a huge one was also never feeling that maternal urge. I've never desired to have a baby or to raise children. I've spoken to a lot of people who've become parents, and a few of them have said to me that they've really looked forward to being able to teach someone something or pass on their knowledge or share lessons with them in life. And I thought, oh, that's a really interesting reason to want to have a child, because there are other situations you could put yourself in where you can teach children or share knowledge. But for them, that was like a major driving force. And for me, that never even crossed my mind as being part of that motherhood experience, I guess. So yeah, I just never had that maternal instinct or that maternal urge to have children. And I think that's probably why I did leave it so late, to like getting to a point where I was really questioning, should I, shouldn't I? Because it had never really occurred to me earlier than that to go, oh yes, that's how I imagine my future. Another one for me, especially in this economy, is the financial ability or inability to have children. Affording a child when childcare costs the equivalent of a full-time annual salary just blows my mind. And especially for women who are forced to take time out, especially if you're going to have a child, a biological child that is, and you carry it and you go through the birth and then you have the maternity leave. Women are forced to some degree to take the time out of their career, out of the workforce, which means not earning money. And yet your expenses are kind of increasing as you bring a child into the world. And I mean, childcare is just one aspect of what it costs to have a child. Yeah, I don't know how people are coping. And actually, I read a really interesting opinion piece the other day about how a lot of women in our age group are now going with the one and done philosophy. They'll have one child and that's it, because they're now weighing up the cost. This is purely from a financial point of view, this argument. They're now weighing up the cost of what it would take to have a second child. And for many of them, they're like, no, that's really going to push me over the edge. We won't have a quality of life. We won't be able to have any form of enjoyment or luxury like ever. And so when you're weighing that up, that's quite a dramatic shift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just having one child because you can't afford more than that. Yeah.
Exactly. Especially now that I feel like maybe in generations past there was more sort of availability or access to like informal caregiving support. You know, they say it takes a village, but so few of us have a village. So few of us know our neighbours or trust our neighbours to look after our kids. And even when I was growing up, not so long ago, my parents didn't need childcare. I would just go to my neighbour's house and hang out with them all day. It was a lot less, a lot less like institutionalized almost as it is now. So financial concerns are such a valid one. And I also don't know how people cope with the strain of all of the expenses. It seems wild.
Yeah. I mean, I thankfully have disposable income, which I'm grateful for, but I have expenses come up all the time that are unexpected or cost more than I've budgeted for. And thankfully I've got that buffer to allow for it. But even me without having children, I find life expensive. And especially in the last few years after the pandemic and then this inflation that's kicked off, things are costing so much more, but salaries haven't necessarily gone up in line with that to afford that. So basically we've just got less to play with, you know. I think the financial side of things is a huge one for me. I was also very worried about bringing someone into a world that is largely unhappy, unsafe, unpredictable, and inflicting that on another human being. I know this is totally morbid because one could argue that anyone who's ever brought a child into the world at any point in history has done so at a time that has been unsafe or, you know, not a financially good time or, you know, times have been terrible, but they've done it anyway and we've just found ways to cope. But I don't know, what do you think about that? I feel a little conflicted on this one because it is very negative and it's not really seeing the positive side of it, but I feel like it's such a big one for me.
It's a very confusing one, and it's probably the one that I actually have the most difficult time making sense in my head, because I agree. I think that there is so much to be said for yes, people have always had children during trying times. And I actually had one person say to me, oh, but if the world is so terrible, your kids would be great and they would make the world better. And I just laughed because I thought that was such an oversimplification of the situation, because there are no guarantees in life. You don't know what kind of child you're going to have. And I think it kind of comes back to this idea of our impact. Like, people want to have kids to have some sort of impact or legacy, especially in a world that can be really bleak at times. And I can really respect why some people would want to pursue that. But firstly, I think that there's quite a lot of pressure to put on a child that isn't even born yet, hasn't asked to be born, and maybe they don't want to have all of this pressure of saving the world. And, that we're always talking about how the next generation is going to solve climate change or all the numerous disasters that we've found ourselves in. And I'm then therefore not surprised that anxiety rates among young people are higher than ever. And the media is often quick to blame social media, which I think is completely valid in some ways. But when I speak to young people, they're like, we're actually really concerned that like the world is going to flood. And I'm like, yeah, that's valid. I'm so sorry. So it's really interesting. And then another thing that comes to mind on this area is that I have never really had a desire to have a legacy. I don't really get the concept. Like, I know what it is, but I don't feel like I need to leave this lasting impression on the world for my life to have been meaningful. I know that I'm just a blip on the, grand scale of human history. And to me, that's not sad or upsetting. That's a relief. That's fun. I'm like a speck of dust floating around in space. And I don't feel that I need to have a child to carry on my name or to remember me after I'm gone. I'm okay to just have my time and be done.
I was going to ask you about legacy because you brought it up. Like, do you care for it? You've answered that. I don't really care for it either, to be honest, because there's no guarantee that even if you do have a child that they'll want to continue your legacy. Like, I have seen so many people older than me, obviously, start a business and then they've wanted to like pass it down in the family, but then the next generation just has no interest in continuing it. So then the business either dissolves or they pass it on to someone else who can continue it. And so this idea of retaining legacy through a child that you have is not guaranteed. And so for me, I'm like, if I do end up building something great that I would love to keep going after I die, then I'll just pass it on to someone that has the interest enough to keep it going, rather than forcing it on someone just because they're a child that I've had and hopefully they'll do something with it. Like, I've never found the legacy argument a strong enough one to persuade me that having kids is the reason to do it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Another one I've got is the environmental disaster we find ourselves living in. Like, I know this is a huge one to unpack, but we can't deny that climate change is real and it's happening, and we're just seeing more and more environmental disasters happening around the world. And who knows what that is going to look like in even 10, 15, 20 years from now, never mind for the lifetime of a new generation that you might bring into the world. I would feel hugely responsible if I brought a child into the world and then they're faced with a lifetime of environmental disasters to the point where I think it will control their lives, financially, geographically, where they choose to live, all the things. What are your thoughts on the environmental point?
I could not agree more. It's scary even for me. We don't even know what is going to happen in our lifetime. We're living in the midst of climate change. We're seeing extreme weather patterns. We're seeing more natural disasters. We're seeing, wildlife having to migrate into human populated areas because of the destruction of their natural habitat. We're seeing a lack of resources available. And I just think if this is not something you desperately want, or even if not desperately want, is probably a bit dramatic, but if this is not something you want, I just think we're at a different point in human history where you need to have a child to populate the world. We are overpopulated. So if this is not something that you want, I just don't understand. Yeah, I just think we're in precarious times. If this is not something you want, let's just let's chill.
Yeah. Another huge deciding factor for me was having to give up so much in order to have a child, especially as a woman. And by that I mean give up or put on pause career, money, lifestyle, freedom. And on the flip side of that, not necessarily seeing having a child as something I gain in return. Because I've had arguments with people like, oh, I would lose all these things. And they're like, yes, but you would gain a child. And that relationship, with them and being a mother would be a whole new experience that you gain. But for me, I've never really seen it as something like that. I've only really seen it as the things I would have to lose or give up. And they're not things that I want to lose or give up, at least not anytime soon. And so I think that was a really huge deciding factor for me, is like, no, I don't want to give up on this career that I have spent many years to build. And like, I know life is not all about work, but I enjoy the work that I do. I get a lot from it. And there's still so much I want to give to it. And I know that if I had to stop that for a period of time to have children, I would lose the momentum. I may not return to it. And I may not return to it in a way that I want to, with the energy that I need required for this sort of job. Financially, we've already spoken about it. I don't really want to be struggling financially just to have a child. I enjoy my lifestyle and the freedoms that I have with it. Like, I can work long days and not have to worry about leaving to pick the kids up from school or childcare, or getting to work and then you get a phone call from the school, oh, your child's sick, you've got to leave. And yeah, so I feel like I really enjoy having that flexibility in my life because I don't have children. Yeah.
Exactly.
Another one for me was a fear of regretting my choice if I did go ahead and have a child, and then feeling resentment towards the child for having made that choice. I know this is like a double whammy, but you can't undo that decision. It's probably the only decision you can't reverse. I mean, like, you can sell a house, you can split from a relationship you're unhappy with, but you can't choose to not have your child anymore if you have one. And so for me, I just was never convinced enough by the idea of having a child, or wanting it enough to know that I would be really happy with that choice once I'm on the other side of it. And I just didn't want to risk putting myself in the position of regretting that choice and then maybe having this resentment build, because actually deep down I knew that I didn't really want it. Have you had any thoughts along those lines?
So many thoughts about this. And you've articulated it really, really well. And it's brought up for me two of my reasons that I sometimes feel a little nervous to share, because I don't want people to judge, but I also think that it's helpful for people out there who might be feeling the same thing and are afraid to admit that they fear resenting a child that they ultimately didn't want. And the other thing that really stuck out for me in what you shared is freedom. My freedom is paramount to me and my happiness. And one of the reasons for that, I believe, is that I have a history of pretty complex attachment trauma, and my early years were very, very difficult for a number of reasons. So my siblings, both siblings, I'm a middle child, and also my parents had pretty complex mental health challenges and disabilities that meant that they really, really struggled with their emotional regulation and their executive functioning. And they did their best, absolutely. But at the same time, I was often not able to have my needs met. And I was actually thrust into a caregiving role well before I was ready for it. Before I even hit puberty, I was acting as an informal carer. I didn't have the terminology for it at the time, but I know what it's like when a child is born into a family that is not ready for it, because I was that child, and it's not fun. For me, I carry that with me to this day. I struggle to express my needs and not feel like it's too much to have my needs met or to have people support me. And it really wasn't until I was in my late 20s that I actually had the freedom that I worked really, really hard for, the financial freedom and autonomy and people around me who supported me, to live my life for myself, to have freedom, to have flexibility, to have fun, to be selfish sometimes. And I am not ready to have a tiny taste of that only to give it up for something that I've never had the desire for. And often when I have shared this reason, I have had quite a lot of pushback from people. They have said like, oh, you can't let your trauma or your history hold you back from something that is so life-changing in such a beautiful way. And again, I come back to the thing of what you said of I don't see getting a child in return as a trade-off that is of equivalent value the way you do. I don't see that the same way as you, and I think that that's okay. And also, who among us isn't using our past experiences to shape our future decision-making?
100%.
I don't think that it's an uncommon thing to try to learn from the past and right the wrongs of the past through the decisions we make in the future. Some people I know have had very traumatic childhoods, and that's the reason they want to have kids, as a way to sort of have a do-over and prove that they can break those intergenerational cycles. And that is often praised by other people as a really valid exercise. But for me, my 30s and 40s, instead of having kids, I am the kid. I'm raising myself. I'm giving myself the freedom to play and to be happy and frivolous. And that is what works for me. And I've never been happier. And I do really fear that if I was to have to give all of that up, because you do, I worry that I would resent that child and the partner I had the child with. I would feel trapped, and I don't ever want to feel that again.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you have any other reasons that were deciding factors for you?
Yeah, so I guess I touched on a few of them. I guess the financial concerns were also another big one for me, and really linked to the freedom thing. Again, growing up, we were always trying to just keep our heads above water, and it's not something that I ever really want to feel again. And I guess the main ones were not wanting to give up my freedom, especially for something I never had much of a inclination towards. And then another one, which is a bit more practical, is like, to be honest, the idea if I was to have a biological child, the sensory experience and like health anxiety that would come with pregnancy and childbirth, the stories I have heard from my friends, they're amazing. They're super women. I don't know how they go through this bodily change. That's another part of the freedom that I think you lose. You are having to have doctor's appointments all the time, which I actually struggle with. I don't like to be poked and prodded at on a sensory level, on a health anxiety level. But also there's this weird thing that happens to many of my pregnant friends where their body is no longer theirs. It's the oven for the baby. People who don't know them come up and touch their belly or lecture them about what they're eating, or, oh, you're having a coffee, you're not supposed to have a coffee. And like just all of this judgment because now you are just a baby maker. You are no longer a human being. It's quite like dehumanizing. Yeah. And I think I would really struggle with that.
Your body's no longer yours. Even with the child who needs you all the time, if you're going to do breastfeeding, for example, they're clutching at you, clinging on you. It's like your body's no longer just for you anymore. Mm-hmm. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah. I remember one of my colleagues was talking about how her house was really cold when she was pregnant, and she was getting lectured by everyone. She's like, well, you're pregnant. You're going to have a baby soon. You're not allowed to, you can't have them in a cold house. She's like, I'm going to keep my baby warm. Like, relax. Like, it's this just invitation for people who have had children and perhaps they had a really different experience or different levels of privilege, whether that be financial or experience or temperament or family support to help raise a child. And I find that many people who have had kids just assume that it's as easy for everybody else or as obvious for everybody else as it is for them. And it just makes me feel really like minimized as an individual with my own life experiences and ability to make choices for myself.
Yeah, for sure. I want to round out this discussion now talking about kind of reaching that point of decision. So we've run through like some factors that we weighed up, the pros and the cons that contributed to our decision making. But I mean, did you ever reach a point where you felt decided? Like, was there a pivotal moment, or has it just kind of been like a slow progression getting to that point?
I think it was pretty much always something I knew, but I just didn't really have the words for it. So I'm a 90s baby. It was already a lot better for me growing up than it was for like my mom's generation. But I still remember it was very much characterized by just complete patriarchy and traditional gender roles. It was just what you did. to be a good woman, you have to be kind, nurturing, giving, beautiful, all of these things, and always do it very, very effortlessly. And so I guess when I realized I was actually allowed to want something non-traditional or different for myself, it was solidified in my 20s when I entered into a long-term relationship, because now I had somebody else that I actually had to discuss this with. Otherwise, I probably just would never have thought about it. So I guess wasn't really one day where we just had this decision. We just kind of kept going back and forth, and he was luckily quite similar to me. He assumed it would always happen for him because that's just what you did. But when we really broke down all of these reasons together, he was like, oh, actually a child-free life sounds kind of badass. And I was like, I know, right? Like we can do whatever we want all the time. So I also feel that I was quite lucky that we had this discussion when I was still in my 20s, because I didn't have quite as much of that biological clock pressure. I know a lot of my friends in their 30s now who do know that they really want to have kids, but they're having a hard time in the dating world. And some of them have had really, really bad relationships that they've stayed in because they're like, well, I need to find my partner to have kids with. I'm running out of time. Or they've left really bad relationships and said to me, I know I really need to be single for a while. I know that that's what's best for my development and my mental health right now. But then the next week they're back on the apps because they know they need to find their partner. They really want to find someone to have children with. So it's, it was definitely like a solidifying of just so many reasons.
Yeah. What a predicament to be in as well. If you do really want to have children and you're feeling that pressure to just get on with it, such as leaving a toxic relationship but then diving straight back into dating again, that must be really tough. I want to share how I sort of came to feeling decided, I guess. It was definitely not an overnight decision for me. I probably talked about it to death for several years before reaching a point where I'm like, no, I'm comfortable with not having children. It probably started in my late 20s and went through till about mid-30s, I would say, maybe like 33, 34-ish. And again, yes, it was something I discussed a lot with my husband. I think you definitely need to be on the same page about this topic with the partner that you're with, because if you both want different things, then that's a deal breaker, right? I think children is something you really need to be on the same page about, whether you want to have them or not. But yeah, like us, I think when we first got together and then we were serious, we're like, okay, we're going to stick this through. We hadn't really talked about it in depth, and I think there was kind of an assumption on my husband's part that, yeah, maybe we'll have kids if you want them. And I remember him saying to me, I'll have them if you want them. And I was like, oh no, you can't put the full decision on me. I don't want to carry the weight of such a huge decision all on my own. I'm like, this has to be a joint thing. We're in this together or we're not. And I was always really firm on that. And then that's what kind of opened up the conversation, and we just attacked it from every single angle. And I think just talking about it to death, and we still talk about it now, even though we're very firm on the choice that we've made. But we sort of have it in more of a joking style, oh, glad we didn't make a choice to have kids because of X, Y, Z, or here's another reason not to, and we kind of make light of it a bit more. But I think that's just our way of going, no, we've made the right choice and we still agree on it. But yeah, I do remember there was a particular day I was just going for a walk and I just felt so frustrated with myself, feeling this pressure to make a choice either way. And I think I was putting a lot of that pressure on myself. Yes, I felt it externally as well from my peers and my family and just society in general to be make a choice about whether you want to have kids or not. And I just went for a walk one day and I was like, do you know what? I'm just so exhausted with feeling this pressure and feeling the pressure to make a choice that I gave myself the permission to just stop thinking about it for a while. And I said to myself, why don't we just not think about it for 1 week and see how that goes? You don't have to think about whether you want to make a choice about having kids or not having kids for 1 week. I could live with that, right? And so I did that, and then that felt really good. And then 1 week morphed into 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And then I just got comfortable with this idea of not putting the pressure on myself to make a choice either way. And then I kind of just naturally came to the conclusion that I felt far more comfortable with the idea of living the life that I was already living and not having children than I did with the idea of having kids. So there's this one analogy, I don't know who came up with it, so I can't credit them, but they always say when you're about to make a huge life decision, how does it make you feel, especially in your chest and in your body? Does it give you a feeling of expansion? Like, do you open up? Do you sit up? Do your shoulders broaden? Do you feel a lightness? Or does it make you kind of regress, go in on yourself, go hunch-shouldered? And always when I thought about life with children, I felt that closing feeling. But then when I pictured my life and my future without them and all the things and the possibilities that were waiting for me, I felt this lightness and this openness. And so it was really funny to notice that and do that little test on myself and go, okay, I think I know what the right choice is here. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, for me, it was just a gradual progression getting to that point of being decided. But yeah, I think I just definitely realized that actually I'm more comfortable with the idea of not having kids and the life choice of not having kids than I am with the alternative. And I've just been so much more relaxed about it ever since. And now I just fully claim the whole, I'm child-free by choice, because I am. I have weighed up the pros and the cons, and I've actively made the choice to remain child-free.
That is so fascinating. Even as you were describing the physical sensations of imagining your life with children, I was like, I just felt this yeah, it was kind of in my like solar plexus, like above my gut, below my chest, and I was like, oh my God, it's so like the mess and the noises and the no sleep, not in a fun way. And then when you were talking about what your life would be like without it, I was like, I actually felt my body relax. That's so fascinating. But yeah, of course we've thought about it. Like all we're taught is that our role is to be good partners, good mothers. So if we're going to go against the grain, of course we've thought about it. So yeah, I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And I think just in closing, if there is anyone else out there struggling with the decision-making process, because I think it is a process, whether you're conscious of it being a process or not, I think everyone comes to it, especially if they're weighing up the idea of maybe not having kids, because they're probably thinking about it a lot more. Do you have any advice for them or any tips? I know we've imparted a lot today already, but what's something that you might advise to someone who might come to you and say, hey, I'm really struggling with the decision-making process? What would you recommend?
I think the main one for me would be connecting with other women who maybe share your experience if you can. We're really lucky now. We can find those people on the internet, but even just being open with your friends or trying to find people who either also know they want to be child-free or who are also a bit conflicted about the decision can just be such a safe, validating space, especially when there are a lot of people out there who are going to try and inflict doubt on you or judgment on you for the decisions you're making. And that's not to say that I think if you're child-free by choice or undecided, all of your friends should feel the same way. I've got many friends who are mothers. I love them. I love their kids. But I also know that motherhood inherently means that you have to reshuffle your priorities, and they're not going to be available to spend time with me in the same way that they once were. And so for me, having the ability to find friends who I know will still be kind of meeting me where I'm at in my life and my priorities has been really validating, not only in making that decision, but alleviating some of those worries that people love to say, oh, you know, you're going to be lonely. I'm like, no, I won't actually. I'll be out salsa dancing with my friends. I'll be very happy. Thank you so much. So finding support and connection through other women who understand, I think would be my main one.
I think that's a great piece of advice. And I think if you also find other people who've made the choice to remain child-free, it comes with a lot less judgment when you do open that discussion with them, because they're coming at it from the same place. And suddenly you might feel like you'll be able to fully express yourself in a way that maybe you can't with a friend who has decided to have children. I mean, I talk about this topic a lot with friends from all different walks of life, and there are people I trust, and I even talk about it with a lot of my friends who've gone ahead and had children because I want to hear the perspective from the other side. And I'm always very careful to choose my words because I never want to talk about it from the perspective of my choice is better than yours, or my decision is a reflection on your decision, because that's absolutely not where I'm coming from. But I think you make a good point, you know, still speak to everyone in your life if you can. But if you can find the safe spaces with those who've made a similar choice, then it might just allow you to come to the discussion with a little bit more ease and openness and help you find your way. I think that's really good. Yeah. There are also heaps of platforms and groups and stuff out there if you are wanting to actively seek it out. So lots of Facebook groups that are designed for, child-free women, and platforms like She Defined, where we talk about the topic a lot. We have so many different angles on this perspective already on our website. So if you are interested to learn more, head to our website. It's shedefined.com.au, and we will be revisiting this topic more in the future, I am sure. Thanks so much for sharing your perspective with us today, Emma. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this topic. I think it's just so important to help break the stigma and let other women who are confused or decided know that they're not alone.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone joining our discussion today. If you have found this episode interesting, please be sure to give us a like and a subscribe. I've been your host, Sharon Green, and if you'd like to learn more about She Defined, visit our website at shedefined.com.au.